Welcome back to the Unlicensed Therapist. Thank you so much for joining us. If you missed our last episode, go back and listen to it first because this is the second half of that conversation with Andrew Shroyer, MA LAPC. He is a Jungian therapist with Christian and spiritual overtones that he uses in his therapy approach. Andrew was in community mental health and recently transitioned from that environment into a group practice. And we've been talking about his view, his approach, how it affected his time in community mental health, what some surprises were for him in group practice. We're going to continue that conversation right now. So stick with us and enjoy. So, Andrew and I are back. We took our brief little coffee break, and now we're going to jump into talking about Christianity, spirituality, and counseling for a few questions here. Andrew, how do you integrate your Christian spirituality in a way that is ethical, it's invitational, and client-centered?
Well, I normally don't speak explicitly Christianity unless somebody is actively that. And it community mental health where we were, there were, especially the people who were coming from our halfway houses or, the mission, there was already a spiritual component there, and a lot of them were deeply involved in that. And so I was able to integrate that in a way that focuses on the transformational aspects of it, not focus on the belief aspects of it. And so if I'm not talking about Christian dogma ever, I'm not interested in that, but I am talking about how there's different, principles, that you could read the Beatitudes and go like, well, what does that mean for the way that our ego can relate to the rest of the world? Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. The meek are people who have a strong ego, but have enough control over it that they are constrained. It's actually constrained strength. It's not weakness. It's not passivity. It is constrained strength, and it means I have the capability of doing a lot of things, but I choose not to do it. It's actually about choosing that. It's not about, passively being that way. And so what does that mean about ego development? Classic CBT tools, and also then having the capability of just letting that stuff go and being more interested in growing and learning in life rather than being right. And so that has a lot to teach people, and it's universal, but I only bring explicitly Christian ideas and symbols or verses when it's a client that expresses interest in that. Otherwise, I just do what I normally do, which is dialogue with the client, have them look inward, always looking inward. That's our main tendency as humans, is to, I feel a certain way, and I got to look outward to see what I can do about it, which is not what we want all the time, and that's not wise all of the time. Like the other day, for example, I was up at a High Pile State Park, beautiful place near us, and I was up there, and it was a really hot day. So when it's hot out, you're like, you're naturally a little bit more irritable. It wipes out a lot of your energy. It changes your mood. but I was feeling good because I jumped in the river and everything, and we had done some, spiritual practices up there. And lo and behold, I realized that I had lost my prescription sunglasses up there. And so they're obviously not cheap. They're not as they're not as expensive as other ones, but I'm immediately just really irritated. I'm always losing stuff, but usually not stuff that's in that expensive of area. But so I'm beside myself. I'm really angry, and my first reaction was to go, and it could have very well been, somebody else's fault or accidentally bumping it into the river. I'm guessing that's probably what happened because I know I didn't touch them from when I put them down, so they had to get bumped somehow to get moved. But at the end of the day, I'm responsible for them. So the fact that they got lost and somebody might have bumped into them accidentally, that's on me. I can't blame somebody else and get angry with them. And maybe sometimes I do that, but on that day I was able to go, nope, that's on me. No, I can't blame anybody else. That's my fault. You're not going to blame anybody else for that, and I just let it go. I mean, obviously, it's still unfortunate that I lost out on $75, but ultimately, it's $75. I can make it back eventually. It's not the end of the world. It's more important that I treat other people with dignity and respect. So that's where I was able to keep that under control. But that's what I'm dialoguing with most people about, of like, okay, so even if they do fly off and, blame the other person, it's like, okay, so what really was that anger about? And so we end up getting back to that point of, okay, so you were influenced by that anger, but really what it was trying to do is teach you the lesson to be more responsible for your stuff. And then we can learn that lesson. That's real inner transformation. That applies a lot of the same principles as Christianity, but it's not using Christian language in any way, shape, or form. And so that's what I do most of the time, but I will incorporate that, especially if a client expresses a lot of interest in that and desire for me to bring that in. Obviously, with my background, I'm able to bring that in a lot of ways that other clinicians just might not have the knowledge about.
I'm curious, we obviously had individuals coming in from a Christian background. I know for a fact we had individuals coming in from a Jewish background, an Islamic background, a pagan background. Did you ever talk spirituality with anyone outside of the Christian realm, and how was that different and how is it similar?
Well, and I think the ethical thing is always to be curious and to admit your limitations. So I do have a great deal of experience and knowledge about paganism, for example, or the occult, or New Agey practices, and Judaism. And so those were ones that I was able to have a lot of, commonality and express a lot of different, and I was very comfortable with that. Islam is one that I did have a couple of, two to be exact, that were very interested in that, and I don't have as much knowledge with. So the way that I would say is like, okay, teach me about this. And okay, we're talking about anger. Teach me what the Quran, for example, would have to say about anger. And I would break that down then into psychological terms and go, okay, then I can break it back down into psychological terms and give that back to the client, and they can use that with what they will. They can put that into their own spiritual language if that's what they want to do as well, and meet them where they're at there. Or they can just take it for what it is and use their, just use the like a non-spiritual approach if that's what they really would like to choose to do. I think it's all in and of the same. I don't think there's a, I guess this really is a viewpoint too of like, I don't personally view this split between the natural world and the spiritual. So like if I see somebody who's overcoming their anger and, really meeting the anger where it's at and learning the right lessons, but not incorporating spiritual language, I don't see that as inherently different than, using their directly spiritual language to do that thing. So if you don't have that split, I don't feel the need to always pull that stuff in. And I also don't feel the need to always put my own viewpoint on things. And that's ultimately, we're there for the clients. We're not there for ourselves. And so I help psychoeducate the clients. I can help put that into, okay, let's break that down. There's a lot of clients that they will ask me a lot about certain things. And this client could be a devout Christian, a devout atheist, and I'll have a lot of the same answers with them as saying, okay, the right way we have a relationship, I have that map of the psyche back there, is to have a right relationship between our ego and our deeper selves. And we don't want our ego in charge of things. So if your idea about whatever it is that, well, I believe this, it's like, okay, that doesn't mean anything to me. Belief is a fixed idea about something. Dogma is a fixed idea. If we have a dogma, our egos are in charge ultimately, because it's saying my thoughts grasp everything that there is to know about this idea, and I'm okay with that. I'm just sitting with that. And I think it's healthy to have ideas and thoughts about certain things, but to be so fixed on it to say, like, well, that's all that I have to learn about this topic. And even more unhelpfully is that you just have to think the same way that I do in order to be okay. It is showing an unhealthy relationship to the ego. And so my job is to help say, okay, that would be an unhealthy way if somebody is coming to me in the form of like and I did have these people, in the form of some like fundamentalist spiritual tradition that like, our way is the only right way. And it doesn't just have to be a Christian tradition. This could be anything. This could be atheist, because like I had a client that would not do the 12 steps because he was an atheist, adamant atheist. And it's like, okay, so this is kind of the problem. I had to be very, just honest with like, that's kind of the problem right there. It's not that you think a certain way. I'm not concerned with like whether you're, an atheist or whatever, but that you're so fixed on that you're closed off to anything else that might even resemble something else. And the 12 steps are definitely not, saying that you have to be a Christian or even a theist at that, to believe in a specific being. It's more of, again, it's for Jung, it was a psychological thing, less so than a, metaphysical thing. And so that's the right way of the ego of like, my ego should not be in charge of my life. But if we get into that place in life, whether we are, no matter what we are, spiritual tradition we are, that gets us in trouble. But we all have to go through that at certain points too. It's not like I have to avoid this at all costs. And it is a stage of life, is that you do get that place where you get these ideas and you get really, fascinated with them and maybe fixated on them, and these are strict beliefs for you, and then you learn to let them go over the course of, hopefully, if you do things right, you will learn to let them go a little bit at a time and learn that, like, curiosity is much more soulful. We're less anxious. Again, I look at, where clients, where they're coming from spiritual traditions. Sometimes their own spiritual traditions are the ones that's causing the anxiety for clients. So, and that's unfortunate because, truthfully, the the right way to do a spiritual tradition or any kind of outlook on life. It should help us develop meaning for our lives and for our experiences, and it provides comfort and sustainability through that suffering. Suffering is not optional. We have to suffer if we're going to really live life. And if you choose not to live life, you suffer anyways because you're miserable. And so it should be providing a place of, well, I'm suffering. This is why I'm going through my suffering, and it has meaning through it. And you don't have to be one specific tradition to do that. So, that's how I help clients dialogue through that. And, okay, what can this teach us about life, and what might our own souls be speaking to us about this? And, again, that's why I'm not a pastor to this day, because I've learned very quickly that if I were to say, okay, that's what you guys believe, but really what is your actual soul talking about? And it might contradict what the beliefs are. That was not a recipe for success as a pastor. It just wasn't, and your average church. Now, there are churches out there that are very open and like that, but your average church is just not interested in that. And I kind of ran against the wall there, and now I can do that. Now I can be that for everybody. Of like, okay, let's step back from perceived dogmas, beliefs. Again, whether you're atheist, agnostic, pagan, whatever that is, what do these things have to teach us? For one, and two, what is your inner life actually saying here? And we got to be honest enough and courageous enough, ultimately, to face that.
Right there, courageous enough.
That's the hardest part, to be honest, is the courage to do that.
I, too, experienced with a lot of folks in recovery that it was either, I can't do AANA because they're Christian, they're Judeo-Christian, and that's not my thing. I'm totally against it. But I also saw people who would say, Judeo-Christian isn't my thing, but it's my higher power. And that seemed to be, for some people, the loophole, where they could say, it has nothing to do with religion, it has to do with something bigger than me.
Yes.
What
Jung had a term for that, and I don't want to get into too much Jungian terminology or anything like that, but his term for that was the self. It was a capital S self. That was the center, sustaining part of our own personality that is a part of each of us. We all have traumas in our lives that we've experienced. We've all had difficult experiences. But through all that, we come to this place where if we do enough work, that there's we feel this sense of being held still. And we find this place of, I'm still centered, I'm still here, I'm still functioning through all of it. And that's the self. That would be the experience of the self, at least. It's not a metaphysical belief or anything like that, but it is more or less a sense of, when you go through all of that stuff and you still find yourself connected in some way, sustained in some way, that's the experience. That Jung just gave that term, the self, that other people would call the higher power or God.
When it comes to community mental health and your Jungian work, how did you see it impacted, or was it impacted by productivity metrics, or was it constrained?
So, on the literal end of it, I was 3 for 3 with community mental health clinics saying, you do whatever modality fits with you, and I never really felt constrained by any of those clinics saying, talk about this, but don't go into that. Don't discuss dreams with clients, or don't discuss any of that stuff. They were very open in that sense of just saying, you do whatever modality works for you, which I was very grateful for. I was glad with that. I was actually kind of surprised that that was the case. I would not have expected that. I would have figured a lot of those places, and of course the notes you do kind of have to align with more of a traditional CBT, DBT model, so I have to sort of figure out a way, and that was interesting to try to figure out a way of, well, how do I really even... I just had a 45-minute conversation with a client about this dream that they had, and that's all that we talked about. And it's like, well, I mean, we talked about the dream and how it aligns and how it can, apply to their inner life and their outer life and what changes they might make. So that's kind of just what I stuck with and figured that out. When it comes to... I'm very big, and I learned this the hard way. When I went through my own difficulties, and my one of the biggest ones for me to overcome was the divorce of my parents whenever I was 16. So I was formed enough to know for 16 years this one way of living, and it's like, you guys are getting divorced, and it just the mother and the father being separated, it does a lot to you, and it creates a lot of confusion inwardly, and it takes you a lot of years to put that back together. But I tried a lot of these quick fix methods, maybe some like self-help type stuff, positive psychology, a lot of those things. And what I learned was, in the short term, it did provide some like temporary positive emotions that I associated with that, and I was able to be happy. And what I learned in the long run, though, is that when you don't really learn and are not authentic with your nervous system, that is not a recipe for success as far as that's concerned. Like, your nervous system is saying, no, this isn't good for me. I don't like this. And if you're saying, no, you're good, you're success, I'm trusting that everything's going to work out to my good, I don't really believe that. So if I'm saying it, I'm not just going to magically believe that. My nervous system isn't going to respond by magically believing it either. So a more authentic way of saying is, life sucks right now. I'm struggling, but I'm still here. I'm still living, and I'm still going to go on, and I'm going to be sustained through all of this. And that's a more authentic way of still saying, I'm going to be okay, but while acknowledging a more real and grounded way of looking at it. And slow is the key word for me, though, is that it doesn't happen overnight. Slow. And you can't do that when you're in community mental health. It's like, I'm preaching to these clients slow, and I'm not doing that at all. And I don't have enough time to even reflect on, well, how did that session go? What did I do right? What did I do wrong? So when I would come to you and you would ask, so how are things going with your clients? It's like, well, I haven't even had enough time to stop and think about that, to be honest. It's like, give me 10 minutes to think about my sessions over the last 2 weeks. And truthfully, that's the reality of what happened, is that I just did not have that capability for myself to do what I would encourage my clients to do. Is it sometimes that, actually quite a bit, is that defenses have been there for years, and they're not going to go away in 6 months to a year. So sometimes that takes 3 to 5 years, sometimes 10 years, sometimes more. It depends on how long and how deep-seated these defenses are. So if you're 2 years in working with a client and nothing's happening, that doesn't mean that the therapy has failed. Doesn't necessarily mean it. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it does mean that it has failed. But a lot of times, I would say most of the time, it means that they're just not ready right now. They're at this place of still formulating relationships, and if we're talking about it through attachment lens, of developing a secure attachment. And if you're their only secure attachment, it takes years to then translate to the rest of their lives. And it doesn't mean that there's that's going to happen in that. And that of course, is contradictory to what insurances want, but that's just the reality of what humans work. And I wanted to slow down, and I wasn't able to do that there. So that's probably the biggest thing for me, is taking things slow, is that we don't have to tackle everything this week. We can take one thing and then we can get to the other things each week. And then we can really be slow and take our time. And I, in return, can be slow and think about the session when I'm done and reflect on what went well this session, what didn't go well, what's the feedback from my clients. Is that feedback honest? Is it accurate? Because that direct feedback doesn't necessarily always have to be 100% taken as gospel, but it should be taken seriously no matter what. And that ultimately, unfortunately, was not able to be done at community mental health as much as I tried. And I stayed there a year and a half, so I gave it my all.
Oh, I don't think that you did anything wrong. The system, just the way that it's set up, unfortunately, was against you. And we had numerous people coming in, and I'm sure you heard it. Well, you're my third or fourth therapist. How long are you going to be here? So there was that whole hurdle of regaining trust from someone who had trust from someone else. And we, unfortunately, went through situations where we would lose one therapist, hire someone, lose another therapist. So people were getting bounced around, and they had every right to be upset.
Yeah, and that, again, that's something that's not talked about enough, and I think that this podcast is a great place to talk about this, because the reality is that that's not just on their end, that's on our end too. Like, that had deeply affected me, that I had to sit there and say, like, I was upfront and honest with them. I didn't hold back. Like, I was completely honest with, like, hey, look, I'm going to be gone at some point. I'm not saying it's going to be in a month. It's eventually going to, and I'm doing exactly what I'm encouraging every one of you to do, which is go with it works for you in your inner world. If your inner world is telling you that something's not right, you have to listen to that. And that's exactly what I'm doing, and I'm encouraging you to do the same. So I was creating that atmosphere of real honesty and openness and saying, like, that's okay, and this is going to end, and that's okay. We can still be friends after this, friendly. You can still message me. This isn't like I'll never talk to you again. And I still have two clients, as a matter of fact, that email me back and forth from the community mental health. But it deeply affected me, too, to have to say goodbye to some of those clients, because I liked working with most of them that I felt bad about leaving. And it's like, that is something that I struggled with for a while, because as the clinician, I wanted to be there for my clients, and I'm in this now. But if we're treating this as true to my anxious attachment, I didn't want to let go of that. I wanted to hold on and cling to that and grasp that, even when and even after my own soul has spoken and said, no, this isn't good. This isn't a healthy atmosphere for you to be in. And so, in working towards a secure attachment, you just have to go, well, what do I actually need to do? What is the helpful thing? And that's something that we can then transfer and encourage our clients to do as well, is to follow through with, I get it. And I was just flat out honest with some of them that said, like, this is the reality of community mental health clinics. Like, obviously you've had this same experience. I would encourage you to just get to a point in your life where you don't have to go to a community mental health. That was my advice to them. That's kind of the thing. Otherwise, this is going to keep happening. Unless you run into somebody like Bonnie, who just stayed there for, I can't remember how many years she said she's been there, but a long time.
Yeah.
But I think that I would have loved to have been the Bonnie of that, but that just isn't something that would have been honest for me to do. So, yeah, it was difficult.
Yeah. You get, and this comes back to that relationship with that individual, that you're not friends, but from their perspective, there may be more in that relationship than there is for you, and you're holding that. You're holding and balancing that, and I don't want you to feel like you're not worthy, but there is this boundary that I have to keep, and I'm holding on to that, and I get attached to people. That's we're humans, we're social creatures, so we get attached to other individuals, and then we have to leave them or they have to leave us, and it's not easy. I can remember having a client pass away, and the first thing that went through my mind was, well, I have to find the family because you have to send them a meal. You have to go to the funeral. All these things that you grow up in your culture, that this is what happens when someone passes, and being told by the Bonnies and other people that, no, when you're the counselor, you can't do that. As much as your drive, as much as your soul is telling you this is what you do, this is where that's where the boundary, you have to put the boundary up.
Yeah, and it's a difficult thing to navigate, and the ethics thing, it's like they're vague on purpose, because obviously you can't put definitives on, let's say, for example, I think you mentioned this last week too, if you were, if you're a therapist in a town of 100 people, you have no option but to have dual relationships. There's no way around that. You're going to see them at the supermarket, you're going to see them at a church, you're going to see them at a community event. That just is the reality of what's going to happen. But it's vague in the sense of like that whatever the boundary crosses, that it doesn't affect the therapeutic relationship, especially on the clinician's end, to be objective. And so that's something that you as the clinician have to hold. And it's not easy. It's not I see two very unhealthy ways of looking at that. Some people are just like, meh, that's just like whatever. I'll be friends with them on social media and talk to them outside of that, and it's totally fine. I've seen that. And I've also seen like if they see me at the supermarket, I want to move out of the town and I can never associate with them and I never want to see them ever again. And it's like they got the plague or something like that because they are or were clients. And it's like neither of those are particularly healthy. They're both extremes, but there's somewhere in there where you cross that, and you have to hold that reality that you have to you can't let it affect the therapeutic relationship prior or now. And coming to that funeral just isn't going to be that's going to cross the boundary no matter what you might think that will cross that boundary. And because I'm going to meet your family now that's going to affect the way that I think of you. And so that just, there is that. I would say that I probably would go to somebody if it was like 10 years prior and they still they still asked me to go and I'm not actively seeing them. Totally probably would be fine with that depending on, the specifics. But, if I'm actively seeing somebody, that's just probably a no-go on that one. So, I've had some clients that I've said, that I said goodbye to a couple weeks ago, and they said, well, I'll probably see you at this event because we both talked about the same event. And I said, well, as you know, the boundaries are this, and you have to inform them of that. And they don't really understand that because I think they see it through the lens of like, this is just, sort of like not a professional friendship, I would say. Mm-hmm. Like, we're not friends where we go hang out, at a bookstore or whatever. But we're still friends in some way. And if I see you outside and you don't say hi to me, I take offense to that. So that that's the way they see it. And so quite a few of my clients said that. And so for me, I have to explain that. Like, hey, we're not. Like if you say hi to me, I'll say hi right back and we'll talk and whatever. Like, that's your comfortability. This is your confidentiality to do or not do with, and that's up to you. if I see you and you don't see me, I'm not going to come up and say hi, because you have to actually be the one to, say something in that regards, if that's what you would like to say. So I think there is a fine line with that, and it's the navigating that has a lot of interesting insights, provides a lot of interesting insights to both the clinician and the client. And that can be, again, taking Yalom's perspective of like every single thing that happens, inside and outside, has room to talk about in the therapy room and has transformative aspects to it. So you can bring it all up. It's all rich material for the therapy process.
I know when it came to my kiddos, my teens, I would have explicit conversations about just seeing me in the community, period, so that they felt safe, that I'm not going to run over and say hello to you and make you feel uncomfortable. And you're more than welcome to come over to me, but if I'm sitting with a big group of people, what do you think's going to happen? They're going to ask, who are you? And I can't tell them who you are. And I think that helped some of my kiddos and teens understand that if I do see you out, we have to be the ones to make that choice, and it's okay that, I'm not going to freak out if you do it, but also, if I walk past and don't say anything, it's because I'm respecting you and your confidentiality.
Yeah, and ultimately what we're trying to do, at least in my perspective, is, with that conversation, is just to build healthy attachment styles with the, especially I think, the little ones, they will take more offense to that, with that, and they won't really be able to grasp that concept. So it does help to have those kinds of conversations.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I have been curious about this since you talked about doing shadow work and dream work and different things like that, because it's just not my area. How do you use dreams and symbols or mythopoetic imagery in a session?
Yeah, it is. So I want to start with like the mythopoetic aspect of it and then get to dreams. I listen to what the clients are saying, and a lot of times I'm listening to what they're not saying and what's underneath what they're actually saying, because oftentimes if they're talking to me week to week about how, this person mistreats me, this person mistreats me, and it might pull up a certain famous story or something like that, and it's like, you sound a lot like whatever character that might be. And there's pulling in the myth, the mythopoetic. Myth doesn't necessarily have to mean like it's a story from the Bible or the Quran or whatever that looks like. It might be, I talk to a lot of clients through, comic books, horror movies, all of those things. And it's like, well, that reminds me a lot of this in, like right now, I am going through It with my wife, Stephen King's It, and I'm writing a reflection on that over the summer and going to kind of publish that at some point. And so for me, it's important to kind of pull of that and make that be a living myth. How do we get something, if we just simply consume something, like just go to the next Marvel superhero movie or whatever. I wasn't a fan of those movies, particularly because I thought they were just dead myths. I thought there's so much richness to those characters, because I've read the comics that they're based off of, and there's so much richness to them that I thought that Disney kind of didn't do a very good job with. It just kind of became very lighthearted, just not, it wasn't what they could have been, which again, why I tended to be more towards Zack Snyder's DC trilogy, because he was doing exactly what I wanted to be done with those characters. It's like, well, these characters are mythopoetic in nature. These are obviously larger than life characters that sort of carry some of these godlike qualities, but not at the same time. They're like this mix between mythology and science, and they're sort of a play in between two of those, and I thought he did a much better job. Not perfect or by any means or anything like that, but I thought that he did a much better job at pulling and actively reflecting on those mythopoetic, through that mythopoetic lens, and saying, like, this is what some of the lessons they could teach us. Like, what if Batman lost his way and started to kill people? Like, that's how far gone he is, because that's one of his sacred rules, is like, I beat people up, I do all these things, but I just don't kill. So what if he's so darkened that he crosses that line? And how does he find his way back? How do we find our way back? Well, it's through a genuine connection with another human being that humanizes them so much that you realize, i.e. the Martha scene, which is, sort of poked fun at, but it's a really beautiful scene. The first time I saw it, I drew tears, so it worked for me. So I didn't know anything about the making fun of that scene or anything like that, but that's what I like to pull from, is stuff like that. And it has been one of the ways for me to make it a living myth, means that we reflect on what we've just watched or read or whatever it is, and explored what that means for our inner and outer lives. So I think there's so much to learn with anything. Even the Marvel movies have a lot to teach you about what it means to live. But if we treat it as just the next thing to consume, the next video game, the next movie, it's a dead myth at that point. And to create a living myth means that we need to sort of make that alive in our own lives and understand why are we drawn towards this certain thing, and why is it important to us, and what can we do differently. And that translates directly into dreams, because dreams are like, interpreting dreams or using dreams as messages is a very old concept. It was sort of lost for a long time, and Freud actually was the one who helped popularize it again, or one of them that helped popularize it. I know there was somebody else before him too that was doing the same thing, but really it was Freud that helped make it become deeply popular. And Jung was also an offshoot of Freud. He was a contemporary of Freud and worked under Freud for a time before he broke off and did his own thing. Mm-hmm. They saw that our psyches, our own understanding, the unconscious, which I don't think it's really, depth psychology in whatever form, whether it be Freudian, Jungian, Adlerian, Jaconian, like Jacques Lacan, all of these different psychoanalytic traditions, they all take the unconscious very seriously, and that is what makes it a little bit different than your average therapist that you might walk into, that they definitely, I think, has done a lot better, I think, now of taking, I think, maybe unconscious processes more seriously. But that's first and foremost, is like, what is going on within the unconscious that we're sort of trying to integrate. And dreams is that one language, because for what they saw and what they studied is that dreams and the psyche existed before we had language, like before me and you can talk in this English language that we're speaking in right now. So what was spoken is what we see is the earliest form of language in art form, which is drawings and images. So the psyche speaks in images. We don't get a message from our dreams that say, you should do this. But I'll give you one example of a dream. It's probably one of the most important dreams for the trajectory of my life, because, at least from that point on, 2014 was when I decided I wasn't going to be a minister anymore. I went to seminary 2012, 2014, that was a decision, like, that's not my path. So from 2014 to 2019, I'm sitting there wrestling with what I want to do. And I've done a couple different jobs. None of them really worked for me. And it just kind of clicked for me one day of, like, I've been doing this like depth psychology stuff for all of these years. And I could actually do this for a living. Like, this is actually something I can do, like, to make money. And so I can kind of do my own soul work at the same time as I'm doing that with other people. And so transformative learning is like, only the wounded healer can hope to heal. That's a big thing for Jung, is that, like, that was a major quote that he stuck by a lot, is that, like, you are going through your own wounding and your own healing process, and we're inviting the client to be a part of that process with you. And that is the trajectory of, like, I'm doing my own healing work, and based on my own reflections and my own healings is how I can even hope to help to give any of this to the other clients, is that I'm my first client. Like, my first client is me, not anybody else. And I have really found it to be true for my own self that in 2019 I made this decision that I was going to go to school for that. So depth psychology, I found 2 programs in the whole country that offer that, and the one that drew my attention the first and foremost was Pacifica Graduate Institute. And I told my dad about it, and I was really excited. And I told him my whole plan. I was going to move to Santa Barbara, and this was my whole trajectory at that point. And he was like, "Is that really a great idea to move to California, and is that practical?" So just like shooting that idea down and just saying, "Well, that's not a realistic goal, because it's going to be expensive to live in California." Not saying any of that is not expensive, and it definitely is. I lived there for 2 years, fast forward, and it was very expensive, and that's why I'm not there now, even, because it just was a very expensive place to live. I fast forward, I have really, I just decided to put that on the back burner. I just was like, okay, well, I'll think about it more and what I want to do. So I just didn't apply to anything. And then I had a dream. I don't have that dream journal right next to me. It's actually back in my bedroom. But I still have the dream written down. And I will never forget this, because it's like intuitively, and this is how dreams work, and this is how the symbols from dreams work. I had this dream, and this was not long after this event happened with my dad, and not long before I decided to go the route that I did, is I had this dream where it starts in the middle of this scene, and I'm running through the woods. And the woods, a very apt metaphor for kind of like the jungle of our psyche, of like we're in the thick of things. And I really admire a lot of Taylor Swift's songs, because she's a great lyricist. She's a great writer. I don't particularly not care for, like, I just love her songs. Her lyrics are great. The Out of the Woods came to mind in that circumstance, because it's like the woods is like we're in the thick of wrestling with the darkness of our own, like, we're trying to make sense of this stuff, and we're in the woods because it's not quite out in the open yet. We're sort of in it still. And I'm in the woods, and I'm being chased by this police officer behind me. And the police officer's in the police car and kind of like driving through the woods, and with the cherries on and the lights and everything like that. And I'm sprinting through the woods trying to get away. And I'm like really anxious. And as I come out to this clearing, there is a train, and that train is taking off, and that train is moving. So I'm like hurrying up, and the car's sort of close behind me, and I jump onto the train, and I make it. I barely make it, but I'm like kind of landed. I think it looks a lot like the Polar Express, like the back of the car on the Polar Express. And so I get onto it, and I'm like, okay, I made it. And I look back, and I see the police person get out of the car and kind of take his hat off and hit the car door with in disappointment. And I knew exactly when I got up what that dream was symbolizing. That police officer was my father complex, my father, my inner image of my father, the inner authority that had a lot to do with my father, because I've always been somebody somebody who's looked to my father for wisdom and guidance and put a lot of energy into that, and trying to own up and live up to those expectations. And so that inner authority coming after me, because I'm quite literally jumping onto a train to go to another destination, another being transported into another place in life that is going to upset that authority figure. I knew exactly what that dream meant for me, because I knew that, like, I didn't have a choice. It wasn't a matter of, do I do this or do I not do that? It's like, no, this decision is already, like, my psyche's kind of already settled on this. So that's exactly how, if we're familiar enough with how we can connect, like, these symbolic images of what these inner characters might represent in our own lives, we can sort of connect them to how they apply to life. So what in every dream that we can connect to that, and we've found a meaning for, as a direct relationship to what we might be able to change in our own lives and our lived experience. So, of course, I applied for the place, and of course he was not happy with it. And you know what? 7 years later, I was right. You know, you follow your inner world, and you know, even if it would have crashed and burned, I still would have been right, because I'm responding to my own inner world that's telling me what to do, rather than following what somebody else wants me to do. Mm-hmm. And we're getting direct. If we're getting a direct message like that from our own soul, then that's really important to listen to and to follow that, rather than what a parent or a society might expect us to do. You know, we follow all kinds of different cultural pulls that may or may not be helpful to us. And I think the goal is to step back and examine what's working for us, what's not working, and follow what's actually inside. What is that message actually trying to say?
Well, Andrew, I know that you had a limited amount of time, and we've got 1 more minute until your cutoff time that you gave me. Will you come back? Because we've only gotten through 13 of, I think, 50 questions, and I so want to continue this.
Absolutely.
And can you give everyone, again, where can they find you? How can they track you down if what they're hearing is, you know, Andrew Shroyer is the therapist for me?
So, Psychology Today, there's therapist search. You can simply find me on there. And then the other way that you can find me is on Facebook. You can find me as well. But mainly just reach out to me through, I have all my professional contact information is through Psychology Today. My phone number's on there, my email's on there as well. So you always feel free to contact me. My name will be, you know, the correct spelling and everything will be in the show notes. So I think I'm the only Andrew Shroyer on Psychology Today. So it should be pretty easy to find, hopefully.
Well, thank you very, very much. I look forward to talking after the recording and seeing when we can, you know, arrange for our next meeting. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I look forward to it.
And that was part 2 of my conversation with Andrew Shroyer, MA LAPC, and I can say that after we stopped recording, we instantly started discussing when we could sit down to record again, as I have so many more questions and he has so much more to share. If, as you listen to this, you felt inspired to look into spiritual counseling or Jungian psychology, then share this podcast. If you continued to hear someone who was living something close to your lived experience, if you heard someone that you thought, this is the person that I'd like to have as my counselor, hit the like button, subscribe, share the podcast. Let's grow our community, because we are only unlicensed as long as we continue to learn. I'll see you next week, everyone.